Well, after a year's delay, the 2020, I felt weird watching that. Did you? Watching the Olympics 2020 Tokyo, on all the graphics, it just looked so strange. But the Olympic Games finally came to a conclusion in Tokyo, Japan. And one interesting facet of the games this year was that they added some new sports to the competition. They added skateboarding, they added surfing, and they added what they call sport climbing. Now, I can't testify to, I sort of wonder if that guy's really, which way is down, on that exactly. But they were really doing some wild things, weren't they? Contestants competed in 3 different events in sports climbing. There was speed climbing, where they had 1 minute to climb a wall as high as they could. There was bouldering, where they climbed as many different paths, different routes up a 15-foot wall in 4 minutes as possible. And then they had what they called lead climbing, where they had 6 minutes to climb as high as they could on a 45-foot high wall. It was really interesting. And watching that competition, well, that took me back to a time in my seminary days when a friend named Victor introduced me to rock climbing, and I was not much of a rock climber, let me tell you, but I enjoyed it. I enjoyed what little bit I did. It was fun, it was challenging, a good way to spend a few hours, or we even made a weekend one time and went and climbed an enchanted rock, and that was a lot of fun. And I don't mean climbed up, just walked up. I mean, we found one of those cracks and went up. So it was a lot of fun doing that. And I was much younger, I was much lighter, and I was in much better shape. Let me guarantee you that. Okay? But imagine if rock climbing was not just an occasional thing that you did for fun. Imagine if every day the very first thing you had to do when you woke up was look up. To look up at a cliff that you had to climb before you could even get started with your day. And so here you go. Step by step, grip by grip, up you go, and it never ends. That's not going to be fun for very long, is it? It's downright exhausting, as a matter of fact. Our Bible story today in Psalm 77 was written by a fellow who found himself in that sort of situation. The inscription tells us that this is a psalm of Asaph, and Asaph was a worship leader. He was one of the people who wrote music for performance at the temple. He had sung, he had led other people into singing, and yet something had happened in his life. And he opens up in Psalm 77 to tell us of his descent into the pit of depression and despair. That's where he finds himself today. And he tells us not only that he ended up there, he shows us how he began to climb out of that pit. It wasn't easy, let me tell you, and we're going to see that in the passage. But we're going to look this morning at Psalm 77, and we're going to read part of it, and then we'll come back to more of it there. So keep a finger there if we do go anywhere else, and we will. We'll also be in Exodus chapter 14 in a little bit if you want to stick a finger over there as well. But let's read and consider, because if you're not in a pit right now, chances are you will be at some point. Psalm 77, beginning in the first verse. I cried out to God for help. I cried out to God to hear me. When I was in distress, I sought the Lord. At night, I stretched out untiring hands, and I would not be comforted. I remembered you, God, and I groaned. I meditated, and my spirit grew faint. You kept my eyes from closing. I was too troubled to speak. I thought about the former days, the days of long ago, years of long ago. I remembered my songs in the night. My heart meditated and my spirit asked, will the Lord reject forever? Will he never show his favor again? Has his unfailing love vanished forever? Has his promise failed for all time? Has God forgotten to be merciful? Has he in anger withheld his compassion? Then I thought, to this I will appeal. The years when the Lord Most High stretched out his right hand. I will remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I will remember your miracles of long ago. I will consider all your works and meditate on all your mighty deeds. As we begin to look at this psalm and unpack what Asaph is writing about here, the first thing we find is a view from the pit. A view from the pit. Crisis has come to Asaph's life. We are not told the particulars, not at all. He's in distress, though, and I don't know about you, but I'm glad that I don't know, because it lets me put myself in the pit and to say, this can matter, this can apply to me. As he faced this time of crisis, Asaph did, first of all, what he had always done before. Many times it says he cried out to God for help. He'd cried out other times, God had lifted him up, but this time seemed different. His heart was full of such anguish. He says, I can't even sleep. God, you won't even give me sleep. You rob me of sleep. He's beyond comfort. And the longer that this thing drags on, the deeper his despair came. God's answer did not come quickly. And in fact, he got to the point he wondered, is God's answer going to come at all? And as someone who had been not only a believer, not only a part of the people of Israel, but a leader, a worship leader in the house of God itself, his thoughts turned wistfully to the past. How good things had been once upon a time, what he calls the former days. Must have seemed like a lifetime ago, don't you reckon? And this man of God, this worship leader, he remembers the songs of praise he had written in the past, but now they felt hollow. They felt a little too glib. They didn't go quite deep enough to deal with, to heal the brokenness that's in his life. Their lyrics seem to mock his present situation. They speak of a walk with God that could never be attained again. And we see that in verse 3 through 6. I remembered you, God, and I groaned. I meditated and my spirit grew faint. You kept my eyes from closing. I was too troubled to speak. I thought about the former days, the years of long ago. I remembered my songs in the night. As all this was on Asaph's mind, night and day, he finally found himself at the point he began to ask questions that he probably never would have entertained before. The sort of things that, good Christians don't ask. Verse 7, will the Lord reject forever? Will he never show his favor again? Has his unfailing love vanished forever? Has his promise failed for all time? Has God forgotten to be merciful? Has he in anger withheld his compassion? That's serious stuff there. That's down in the pit stuff. To say this sort of stuff out loud means you've gotten past the fear of the lightning bolt, right? In fact, you're sort of to the point, a good old lightning bolt might give me some relief. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you're there right now. There's a hint in what Asaph writes. It's just a hint of moral failure. Somehow, some way, he compromised himself, compromised integrity, compromised the way he ought to be, and he wonders, is God ever going to have mercy on him again, or has he gone too far? It's not unusual. It's not unusual for us to feel that way. But that's not the only sort that can go through these times. Remember old Job? Job never did anything. He watched his mouth, he watched his eyes, he was careful in the way he conducted his life, and then zap, one thing after another, his whole world fell apart. And it got so bad that Job's wife told him, hey, Job, you know what? You just need to curse God and die. So we're at a critical point. He's reached a critical point in his life. It's the spiritual point of no return. Either he can follow the advice of Job's wife, or he could begin to work his way back through what he knew about the character and the power of God. Because he somehow realized that was going to be the only way out of his pit. That was the choice he made. He says, then I thought, to this I will appeal, the years when the Most High stretched out his right hand. He found something to anchor his hope on. And it's the character, the power, the mercy of God. By appeal. He says, to this I will appeal. And you know, that might sound, we're thinking, oh, that's a court case, right? But it doesn't mean that, really. He's not wanting to argue with God like Job did. Somehow he grasped the truth that the way out of his particular pit is to get his mind off of his situation. It's to get his mind off of God's current silence. And it's to get his mind onto what he learns about the character of God from what has gone on before. The great mercies, the great acts of God in the past. And what he's doing is he's like those people that are climbing that wall. He's looking for a foothold. You know, sometimes that's all you need to get out of the pit, isn't it? A foothold. And he finds his foothold. Don't miss this. He finds his foothold in the character and the deliverance of God. Verse 11. I will remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I will remember your miracles of long ago. I will consider all your works and meditate on all your mighty deeds. Asaph knew the history of his people. And he knew that the history of his people was the history of God and his mercy on mankind. They had gotten where they were because God had seen them through. And so he goes back. He goes back in time. He goes back in his memory. He goes back, way back in the Old Testament to the early days and the events that surrounded the deliverance of his forefathers from slavery in Egypt. He began to reconsider not only the events themselves, because you know what? We can say, well, this isn't that. God did that, but that doesn't mean he's going to do this. But here's what he does. Here's the way he looks at it, and here's the way we're going to have to look when we find ourselves in the pit, is we've got to look at the character and power of God. He's the same God today as he was yesterday. And he does not change. Look at verse 13. Your ways, God, are holy. What God is as great as our God? You are the God who performs miracles. You display your power among the peoples. With your mighty arm, you redeemed your people, the descendants of Jacob and Joseph. The first thing, there's 3 steps here. So go on and put number one. The first thing Asaph does is to make a declaration about the character of the God he serves, the God of Israel. He says, "Your ways, O God, are holy." Now, there's a lot of different things we can say about the word holy. But I think this is what Asaph is getting at, and that's that God is pure. He's straight down the line. He's not this way this day and that way that day and that way another. He's always the same. God, you can be counted on. There's no secret, dark side to our God. Now, there's not many of us here that are old enough to remember the early days of personal computers. But it used to be that when you typed into your computer, first of all, you had to know this language. You had to memorize these words to put in to even get things to start. And then you would, if you were going to type, say, a paper for school, you would type it in and it would look like, computer characters, just little, just chunky old. And then you would say, okay, I'm going to print it, and hopefully it's going to come out looking pretty. And it generally would, and it was a big deal, believe it or not, when they finally came out with programs where what you looked at on the screen was exactly how it was going to look when you printed it. And they had a whole little anagram for that. It was WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. And that was exciting back then. This is going to look nice. All my formatting is right, my tabs and it was a big deal, believe it or not. You kids don't even know what we're talking about. It's a whole lot, and even that was a whole lot better than the old style. I had college professors. I couldn't turn in papers if I'd used whiteout on them. So guess what? You get almost the way to the bottom of a page and mess up. Got to type the whole page over again. What you see is what you get. Well, you know what? With God, what you see in His Word is what you get or who you get. He is holy. He is faithful. When you find people getting into trouble and falling into pits, it's generally because they start to doubt the character of God. And they confuse things. They say, well, I don't think He'll help me, as if it all depends on them. You know what? It doesn't. It doesn't depend on us beyond the point we need to ask. If you are His, He will be faithful. If nothing else, He's going to be faithful to His character. He will not let you go. Psalm 23:3 says, He guides me in paths of righteousness. What? For His name's sake. Not because I'm a great guy. What you see is what you get with God. He's holy. You can count on Him. You can count on Him, whether you're talking about something that happened a long time ago or where you're at right now. God can be counted on. The next line sounds sort of foreign to our ears. It says, what God is so great as our God? What? There's only one God, right? Well, Asaph lived in a day when every two-bit people here and there that had their own little walled city, they thought they had their own gods and goddesses, and my God's bigger than your God. But they were just products of the imaginations of people who just somehow knew there's something bigger than me in this world. Today we stand sometimes against people who say, my God is better than your God. Muslims say that. Hindus say that. The biggest challenge in our world today, I think, is probably people who say there is no God. There's no God. They've hitched their faith, they say, to science. But my friends, they haven't hitched their faith to science. They've hitched their faith to scientism, which is a faith. It's not what you find in the test tubes and looking through the microscopes. It's a whole kind of belief system they build. Well, if I can explain how that happened there, then we figured it out. God, we don't need a God anymore. I love the title of the book that Brett Bennett's Sunday school class has been studying here lately. It's called, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. I agree. They have a faith in something that is always, always going to let them down. But along with God's character, Asaph depends on something else. He looks to God's power that is displayed in miraculous fashion. In verse 14 it says, "You are the God who performs miracles. You display your power among the peoples. With your mighty arm you redeemed your people, the descendants of Jacob and Joseph." God, you are powerful. Nothing can defeat you. And compared to the stories of the so-called gods and goddesses of the nations around them, the God of Israel had done much, much more. He had worked in miracles again and again and again over previous generations. It wasn't some myth that had to go back so far that no one had even written it down. It had to be received from some vision or something. No, one of his greatest acts of deliverance had come a few centuries before. And that was when the people of Israel had followed God's leadership under Moses out of Egypt. They'd been slaves there. There'd been 10 terrible plagues that were visited on Pharaoh and the people of Egypt, until he finally relented and let them go. And so they came out, and they came out of Egypt, and they're headed toward their promised land. And God sort of directs them in a path that puts them where Pharaoh and his army are after them, and the Red Sea is in front of them. And it looked like they were trapped. And Moses cried out to God because the people were angry with him. And in Exodus chapter 14, we read the story. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp near Pi Hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea. They are to encamp by the sea, directly opposite Baal-zephon. Pharaoh will think the Israelites are wandering around the land in confusion, hemmed in by the desert. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them. But I will gain glory for myself through Pharaoh and all his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord." So the Israelites did this. When the people of Egypt, or king of Egypt, was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their mind about them and said, "What have we done? We have let the Israelites go and have lost their services." So he had his chariot made ready and took his army with him. He took 600 of the best chariots, along with all the other chariots of Egypt, with officers over all of them. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, so that he pursued the Israelites who were marching out boldly. The Egyptians, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots, horsemen and troops, pursued the Israelites and overtook them as they camped by the sea near Pi Hahiroth, opposite Baal-zephon. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, 'Leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians'? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert." Moses answered the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." Perhaps that last sentence is what Asaph found and what he held on to in his own crisis of faith. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Asaph lets his imagination loose. He begins to envision how the elements responded to the activity of God way back then, and how God's power is able to do whatever it needs right now. Look at verse 16 back in Psalm 77. The waters saw you, God. The waters saw you and writhed. The very depths were convulsed. The clouds poured down water. The heavens resounded with thunder. Your arrows flashed back and forth. Your thunder was heard in the whirlwind. Your lightning lit up the world. The earth trembled and quaked. Your path led through the sea, your way through the mighty waters, though your footprints were not seen. You led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. When we stand down in the pit where Asaph stood, we need to do as Asaph did. First, he recalled God's character. He's unchanging. He's holy and faithful. God, you're no different today than you were back then. Second, we need to rest on God's power. It's a power that's able to do whatever he wants. But there's one more thing Asaph takes from that episode in Exodus. We need to remember that sometimes God's way is through the sea. You get that? Sometimes it's going to be through the difficulty, through the obstacle, through the thing that we don't see how in the world it's going to happen. When Lisa and I were on vacation a few weeks ago, we were up in Colorado and we were in Durango and stopped at a thrift store in Durango. And I want to tell you how cheap I am, okay? When I go to thrift stores, I look through their CD racks. And I'm always looking for music that I want to put on my iPhone. I've got like 6 days of music on my iPhone. And it's all right until it starts playing bluegrass all the time, and then Darren starts looking for a pocket knife. But, so there was a CD that we used to have the tape. I think we still have the tape somewhere. But I found this. It's called Songs from the Loft. And I was thinking, that I was a young pastor. And, man, that was so great that 20-some-odd years ago we'd listened to this and loved it and played it for the kids. And then I was talking to Sharon about it this morning. She goes, "Oh, yeah, back in high school." But Amy Grant and Wes King wrote a song that's on here that says, "We believe in God. We all need Jesus. Because life is hard. And it might not get easier. But don't be afraid to know who you are. Who are you? If you trust in Jesus, you're a child of the King. But don't be afraid to know who you are. Don't be afraid to show it. If you believe in God, if you say you need Jesus, He'll be where you are. And He never will leave you." That's some good stuff. That'll preach. Maybe you're in the pit right now. Listen, don't give up. Believe in God. Confess, "I need Jesus." Recall His character. Rest on His power. Remember that sometimes His way is through the sea. It's through the obstacle. He'll not let you go, my friend. He'll help you get out of that pit.